Welcome to the Wellhausen Hypothesis, exploring historical processes. The Tanakh, a cornerstone of spiritual thought, has shaped humanity profoundly. Its cultural, intellectual, and ethical values are globally acknowledged. In the realm of academic study, researchers often attribute these profound achievements to later periods, presuming that, like in other fields, the current form of the Tanakh evolved over time. Earlier forms were perceived as rudimentary, closer to paganism. Yehezkel Kaufman in his work outlines this view. The rise of evolutionary theory in all sciences, including cultural history, posited that humanity progressed from a low to a high state of culture, and thus, monotheism, being a higher religious belief, was deemed a later development. This approach challenges the core Tanakh narrative of God, revealing himself early and establishing a covenant with his people. It doesn't address the truthfulness of the tradition. Kaufman refers to this tendency as exaggerating development. The Wellhausen methodology, applied to understanding the Shabbat in Israel and its development, is tied to Wellhausen's broader evolutionary perspective on the development of Israelite religion. Now, this approach fragmented historical passages in the Torah and prophets, deeming them unfit for early periods because they were too developed. A notable shift in the 20th century, based on studies of ancient Near Eastern ethics, suggested that the core content of the Decalogue, 10 Commandments, was not too advanced for Moses' time, countering Wellhausen's thesis. The discovery of Ras Shamra texts caused a significant upheaval. The expressions found in Isaiah, once attributed to Hellenistic influences nearly 6 centuries later, were suddenly predating the prophets by several centuries. This realization led to a re-evaluation of many critical theories. The core hypothesis of Wellhausen and his followers was that the Tanakh was written much later than the events it describes, a view that has been increasingly challenged by archaeological findings. The assumptions of a late composition have been steadily eroded by discoveries that predate and parallel the biblical narratives. For instance, the discovery of ancient wisdom literature, psalms, complex legal systems, and epics has undermined the claim that the Tanakh falsely attributed advanced culture to early periods. Yet, despite these challenges, the critical consensus that the Tanakh was a later composition remained unshaken. The theory that changes in style within the biblical texts indicate different sources or periods is also questionable. Diverse compositions by the same author are common in literature. The narrative structure of the Tanakh, with distinct sections like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, can be explained within the context of the biblical narrative itself, without resorting to late redaction theories. Wellhausen and his school's failure to consider that the purpose of the texts, rather than their composition date, might account for stylistic differences, illustrates a significant oversight in their methodology. The assumption that any stylistic or thematic variation implies different historical sources has led to an overly fragmented view of the Tanakh's composition. In reality, variations could reflect the diverse social strata or different aspects of a complex tradition rather than strictly different historical periods. The critical methodology applied to the Tanakh, assuming its late composition, contrasts sharply with general historical research methods. Typically, a document from early periods is considered reliable unless external or internal evidence strongly suggests otherwise. However, biblical criticism often dismisses such documents a priori, demanding evidence for events that might not have been recorded elsewhere. This approach also tends to interpret historical accounts as later inventions or exaggerations. For example, the account of the manna in the wilderness is often seen not as a factual description, but as a later symbolic or theological interpretation. A major flaw in the critical approach to the Tanakh is the dismissal of its historical narratives as a priori non-factual. This stands in stark contrast to other ancient texts, where even fragmentary evidence is often taken at face value unless proven otherwise. In biblical criticism, however, even substantial textual evidence is frequently discounted. The critical approach has also been applied to understanding monotheism's development in Israel. Since it presumes the Tanakh was composed late without divine revelation, it seeks to trace the evolution of monotheism as a gradual human development. This perspective fails to consider the possibility of a fundamental and sudden shift in belief, as described in the biblical narrative. In conclusion, the Wellhausen hypothesis, though once a dominant force in biblical scholarship, has faced significant challenges. The evolving landscape of archaeological discoveries and a deeper understanding of ancient Near Eastern cultures have called into question many of its fundamental assumptions. As we continue to explore the historical processes behind the Tanakh, it's crucial to approach these ancient texts with an open mind, recognizing the complexity and richness of the tradition they represent.